Wonderful. Okay, so the first 4 days of this week, we learned the first mimer, the first discourse in the book Torah Or, and it talked about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, how to arouse, how to contact Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob now in the time of exile, thousands of years after they passed away. And the answer is that every single Jew has inside of him, inside of their soul, him, her, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is the love of God, the fear of God, the faith in God. And we arouse this by doing the Torah and the commandments in a way of joy and thinking deeply about what God is, and prayer awakening in our mind and in our heart, and appreciation, and a appreciation of God, and an emotional appreciation of God. And that emotional appreciation of God, if it's genuine, that is the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob inside of our souls. And this also brings about this joy that causes a reaction from God, that God inspires us with even more love and more awareness and more awe of him. And this inspires us in turn to have more of an arousal and a connection to him. And then that arouses him to have more connection with us, etc., until the whole thing will have this big critical mass of love and appreciation. And that's the whole idea of what Moshiach is supposed to do. Moshiach is supposed to arouse us, and therefore these are the words of the Moshiach. What we're reading here, the leader of Chabad of every generation, is the Moshiach of every generation. And the whole purpose is to appreciate God and to appreciate our obligation to him, to God, to make this world a perfect place. That's our obligation. That's what Mashiach is going to bring about in the end, but it all has to be by means of us. That's part of his work of the Mashiach, is to arouse us to really want and to believe that this world can be perfect and can be perfected. Okay, that's what we learned in great detail in the last 4 days. And if you want more details, just go back to our website and YouTube, and there they are. You can see them again. Okay, today we're going to learn about a very interesting thing, and that is the staff of Moses. Moses had the stick, right? He has the staff. Aaron also did. And Moses and Aaron, they had this staff, and Moses threw the staff down in front of the Jewish people. In front of Paro threw it down in front of Aaron threw it down in front of Paro. And in any case, this staff turned into be a snake. And Moses did it in front of the Jews. But here we're asking a more question. Aaron did this in front of Paro. So Aaron goes in front of Paro. Moses and Aaron go in front of Paro, and Aaron throws a stick down, and the stick turns into it's not called a stick, it's a staff. I guess it must have been bigger. It doesn't exactly explain what the measurements are. Some places it says that it was tremendously heavy. In any case, Aaron threw down his staff and it turned into a snake. And then Paro called his sorcerers, and their staffs also turned into snakes. And then Aaron's snake turned back into a staff, and it swallowed up all of their staffs or their snakes or whatever. It swallowed up the whole business. And it didn't impress Paro at all. Now, the interesting thing is if you look, you'll see that this action that he did of throwing his staff down and making it into a snake, that he did to Paro, had really absolutely nothing to do with the plagues. This was just supposed to be some sort of a sign to impress Paro of the greatness of Moses and Aaron and God. And it didn't impress him at all. It had no effect on him whatsoever. So, I mean, what did they do it for? That's the whole question. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe and Aaron, God spoke to Moses and Aaron. Good morning, Boker Tov. Are we recording? Yes. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. God spoke to Moshe and Aaron, and he said, Kach et matcha, take your staff, hashlech lifnei Paro, throw it down in front of Paro, v'yel tanin, and it'll become like this big snake. There's different opinions of what it was, but it was some sort of a snake, a serpent, a crocodile or something. And then vayivla mata Aaron, and then the staff of Aaron swallowed up their staffs. There's one of the commentaries on the Torah called the Safrono. He says that the magicians of Paro, they couldn't really create living snakes. They could just make their staff look like a snake, but it wasn't really alive. So then when it says that Aaron's did like 3 miracles here. First of all, he made his staff into a real snake, and then it turned back into be a real staff. And when it was a staff, it swallowed up their staffs. Okay, in any case, the whole business from the beginning to the end had no effect on Paro whatsoever, and it wasn't one of the plagues. It wasn't one of the plagues. What did this have to do? Why was this like the cartoon before the main feature or something? Why did he throw the staff down and it became a snake and ate it up and etc. like that when it didn't really have any purpose? It wasn't the plague and it had no effect on Paro. Let's understand, what is this staff that transformed to be a snake, and afterwards it came back and became again a staff? Why was this the first miracle, this proof that was given to Paro before the 10 plagues? What's this got to do with that? Well, right, uproot a mountain or something, bring fire from heaven, show him what you can do. Well, how is this showing? I'll show you what I can do, Paro. I can take a stick and turn it into a staff, but his sorcerers did the same thing, more or less. And in the end, it doesn't make any difference because it had no effect on Hine Kasiv. It is written, what is this turning a staff into a snake? Why is this the preface to all of the other 10 plagues? What is this coming to tell us? Now, all the 10 plagues were there in order to teach Paro that there's God. Right? There had to be 10 because it was 10 different aspects of godliness and etc. This was to counteract the 10 aspects of egotism and evil that Paro manifested. So Hine Kasiv, it says, Vayanatzlu et Mitzrayim, says the Jews that they cleaned out Egypt. It says, Sha'asu kamitzula she'ein bo dagim, they made it like a fish pond. It has no fish in it. Took everything out. Perish shalachtu kol hanitzutzos, they lifted up all the sparks, shenaflu b'shvira, which fell in the breaking of the vessels. Aleim, to them, to the Egyptians. Aleim, to the Jews gathered up all the sparks which fell. They gathered these sparks to them, to the Jews. And what are these sparks? We'll talk about this in a second. And Egypt became empty until they remained like a fish pond or an aquarium with no fish in it. There was not even one spark. Sparks, they took out all the sparks. What type of sparks? What are these sparks that fell in the breaking of the vessels? What does it mean to elevate them? That was the whole thing of going out of Egypt. They took all the sparks out. Says they also took out money. The Rebbe has an interesting sikha. Says that why did they take out the money? Because God promised Abraham that the Jews are going to be slaves in a strange land, and then afterwards they're going to go out with a lot of riches. So the Rebbe said, does that really make any sense? I mean, is a person willing to see his children suffer for 210 years, for 4 generations in exile? So there wasn't 410 years of pure suffering. It says there was 116 years something of pure. But even one day to suffer with such terrible suffering, and Paro killed tens of thousands of Jewish babies, and it was worth it just to go out with money. That's ridiculous. So the Rebbe said, no, that money had sparks of holiness in it. And it was worth all the suffering for these sparks of holiness. What are these sparks? What's going on? What are the sparks of holiness? This idea, the breaking of the vessels, mitat zayin malachim. In the Torah, it's referred to as the death of the 7 malachim in Parshas Vayishlach. In the end of Parshas Vayishlach, where it talks about Esav and all that, it talks about that there were 7 kings that they lived and they died. Right? They ruled and they died. This refers to a spiritual level, which is called the 7 kings of Tohu. Shenishbru v'naflu lamata into Bria Yetzir and Asiya in Klippa and Sitra Achra. Okay, what is this talking about? What's this going on about? Just in a very simple way, we see that there is evil in the world. We see that there is, misfortune and confusion in the world. To the degree that evil people succeeded. We just had 7 years ago, right? There was the Stalin and Hitler and what was it? And the Japanese and Mussolini. And then after, it's not lacking examples of evil people that succeeded. What's it, Mao Zedong, they said he killed 100 million of his own people, right? And he died peacefully. Evil succeeds. How does this happen? How does it happen that evil people, cheaters, liars, murderers, mafia, right? How does it that evil exists? And how does it that it exists inside of us, right? Sometimes it's all that we can do not to be as evil as Stalin and Hitler and these other people, right? You get mad at somebody, you did who knows what. And this thing, people get into lying and cheating and lust and the revenge, all these terrible things. And the day of the Mashiach, this won't be. Why is it that there is here now? Look at the 10 commandments. What are the 10 commandments to the Jews? Don't steal, don't kill, right? Don't commit adultery, don't, right? Worship idols. These are things which are inherent in us that we want to do. To the point that that's the 10 commandments. Where did these things come from? So the answer is they come from God. What's the question? So if they come from God, maybe that's what God wants us to do. He said, no, God wants us to have the option to do it. But he doesn't want us to really do it. But that's up to us. So where did this option come that God created all this evil? It's called the Yetzer Hara. Where did it come from? So it said there was the whole process by which God put bad, separateness, evil into the world, darkness, confusion. He put in, that's called the Sitra Achra. Sitra Achra means the other side. It seems that the world is opposite of God. Something, it's a real entity. And maybe God is also real, could be. But the main thing is this world is real. And when a person gets into it, or a person gets into drugs, whatever, you can get addicted to drugs, to all sorts of crazy things people get addicted to, violence, pleasures. They can't get out of it because they think that's the only reality there is. There's like no other option. That's what the world presents. God wanted the world to be that way, potentially, but he didn't want us to actually take that route. But we can do it if we want to. He did this by a process which is called the breaking of the vessels. Okay, how is it? The soul of a person, before it comes into the body, it was totally negated to God. The soul. And regarding the revelation of godliness, which is in heaven, right, where the souls are. Like it says, like was it the Elijah the prophet said, or was it Elijah the prophet said, Chai Hashem, living God, God is the living God that I was standing before, that I stood before. The soul before it comes into the body, because then there was no darkness that concealed over godliness. That's how the soul is before it comes into the body. Nothing conceals over the revelation of godliness that was totally, the soul was totally surrendered. The cave, and since the soul comes into the body, then the body conceals over it, and the world seems to be like it's a real thing, like a separate thing, like an independent entity, to the degree where it seems that it's the only reality. There's no creator and there's no God. We cannot see any sort of reason to surrender ourselves or that the fact that the world already is surrendered to the infinite light of God, which is creating it, enlivening it all the time. Right? The world doesn't enliven itself. But nevertheless, you see there's genius people, philosophers and scientists, and they 100% are certain without any doubt, and they can write books about it, that there's no such thing as God, there's no such thing as a creator, and they can explain everything, right, according to science. The kachal derech mashal, at least they believe they can. Okay, kachal derech mashal is this idea of the breaking of the vessels, these vessels, these sparks of what's called this order of creation called tohu. Shenitlabshu b'klipas, that they came down into what's called the shells of the lower worlds, bria. That's a lower spiritual level than atzilut. Atzilut is the world of pure godliness, and bria says is the world of the souls. And then Yetzirah is like the world of the angels. And then it comes down into Asiyah, to the physical world, the klipos, into what's called the shells. The physical world conceals over these units of godliness and hides over them totally. We call tzad in every possible way, shelo yargishu, that we can't feel it. So God figured out this amazing way to conceal himself. And until something like diamonds are hidden under the ground, right? Sometimes you have a spy that he knows how to act like, the spy from Russia comes to America. So he knows how to act like an American and talk like an American and this, but inside is really a Russian. The same thing, there's the world seems to be something separate. It seems to be that it's here, but really there's godliness inside of it. But he knows how to hide himself. God knows how to hide himself. If the world seems to be a separate thing on its own, like Paro said, we'll learn in this week's Haftorah, we'll learn this, God willing, at 3:00 from the prophecy of Ezekiel. The river belongs to me. The river in the Nile River was the source of life. The river belongs to me, said Paro. And what about me? I created myself. They might admit that there is a God that's ruling, that's bigger than me. They might admit it. But he's got nothing to do with the world. We learned about that, if you remember it, the class at 3:00, that the three groups of plagues that were to combat three different attitudes that the Egyptians had to God. The first one is God doesn't exist. The second one is that he does exist, but he's very far away from the world. And the third one is that he might be actually involved in the world, but he hasn't got power to control the world. In order to do this, that's klippa. Klippa is that either God doesn't exist, or he doesn't care, or he's not involved. And even before the breaking of the vessels, there were these sparks. Even though these sparks were totally united with godliness, just like our soul was before it comes into the body. But these sparks were totally united and surrendered and one with godliness, because then there was revealed the infinite light of God in them in a revealed way, in a total unity. But after this, what's called the breaking of the vessels, which that's what God wanted there to be. He wanted there to be the potential of bad in the world. So he broke what's called these vessels that were containing these sparks, these holy vessels that were containing the holy sparks. Something like our soul had its identity before it came into the world. And somehow or other, it lost this identity. It came into the world. These sparks also came into the world, and they were clothed in klippas, in shells, in physical things in the world to conceal it. Kamashal laguf, just like the body that hides over this soul that we talked about. Lochach, therefore, einam yocholim liyos v'bechinas bitol, they cannot be surrendered, kamosha yatechila, like it was in the beginning. So in other words, every person has a soul inside of his body, and that soul is a testimony to the existence of God. One second, excuse me. But it's concealed. So the soul is completely subservient to the body and to the physical world. The same thing, these sparks of holiness. That's the life and the meaning which is in everything, but it's totally subservient to the world. The person doesn't think, how can I use this book in order to serve God? He just thinks of, how is this book going to serve me? What can I get out of it? How can I use my car to serve God? He said, no, how can I use this car in order to serve me? Why I want places I want to go. So the real spark is concealed inside of it. Just like a person thinks about his soul, right? How can I use my soul in order to serve God, to love God? No, he thinks about it, doesn't even think about his soul at all. His soul is just like sort of batteries in order to keep his body and his egotistical ideas are just going. And therefore, that's why this world is called klippas, it's called shells. It's something like a shell which covers over the fruit, and the fruit is concealed inside of it. Sometimes the only way that you can take the fruit from the shell is by means of breaking the shell. Also, in order to take some sort of sparks of holiness out from these klippa, which hides over it, there has to be a breaking, and that's the idea of the 10 plagues that God made to take these sparks up. Behold, it is written that there's a river that came out of Eden, and there it got separated, and it went to 4 heads. One of them is called Pishon. Right, Chidekel, it said the 4 right in the beginning of the creation, in the beginning of the book of Genesis. What is this river that came out from Eden? This is Hamshacha. This is a spiritual coming out. These are spiritual levels. The spiritual level, it was in physical world also. These 4 rivers were the real, Euphrates and the Nile, whatever. But the Torah is talking in physical terms, but it's really, it appears to be talking about physical things, and it was, but really it's speaking about spiritual, what the spiritual worlds are that that this physical world represents. So it says that the river that came out of Eden, this is an arousal of godliness, a ray of godliness, which comes from this level of chachma of atzilus, the highest aspect of the creation, if you want to call it. The highest aspect of the creator in relation to the creation. It's called Chachma, the highest of the 10 Sfirot, and Atzilut, which is the highest of the 4 dimensions. That's Eden. And there is pure godliness. And by means of that, it comes down, God, or Ein Sof, the light of God, in the rest of the world of Atzilut. And it's drawn down into the level of Malchut, the lowest aspect of Atzilut, and that's called the garden. And that's what it means that this river, which is a level of spirituality, which comes from the essence of God, it comes down into the outer worlds. But first of all, it goes through this upper dimension, which is called Atzilut. That's 10 aspects of pure godliness. That's this river that comes down. It's only one river there. But as soon as it comes down to the next lowest dimension, which is called Bria, then it separates this river of spirituality, of godliness, separates into 4 heads. And these 4 heads, 4 heads, just like rivers, that no river is similar to the other one, right? The Mississippi River is not similar to the Danube River. All rivers are different. The waters are different, and a different tasting, a different nature, different fish grow in there, and not also the size of them and how long the rivers are. Also, these 4 aspects of 4 flows of godliness that came down into the worlds, they're not similar to one. Pishon, that's the Nile River, and that is the spiritual force, or called the spiritual angel of Egypt, and it's drawn down and fell in. There fell in a lot of these sparks that broke into Egypt. So Egypt, therefore, was an actual physical place, but it came at a spiritual source of separation. And in this spiritual source, there fell a lot of these sparks that the Jewish people are supposed to elevate. Now we can understand the miracles that God showed to Egypt. Like it says, Vayedu Mitzrayim, like it says, that now Egypt will know that I am God. What does it mean? They will know. The word Yedu means to know, but the word Yedu also means to break. Where do we see that? It says Vayedu Bam et Anshe Sukkos, and they destroyed the people of Sukkot, a sentence. And whereas I think in Malachim, the kings, you have to look and see. Shoftim, I think. In any case, the word Yedu also means to break. So Egypt will know that I'm God, and Egypt will be broken by the fact that they know that I'm God. What does this mean? Like we talked about before, that in order to take out these sparks from the holiness, which the sparks of holiness from the shells which cover over them, it's impossible except to be by means of breaking the klippas, breaking the shell, something like a nut, right? A nut, a walnut, you have to break the shell. Okay, let's just, so that we don't get too abstract here. The Rebbe is comparing these sparks of holiness, which is in everything in the world, to our soul, which is in our body. People get their souls are in their bodies, right? And their souls are completely misused. They get caught up in the world, right? To the point where a lot of people like really get caught up. And let's just take an example, which we've taken a lot of times, of addiction. People get addicted. They get addicted to gambling. They get addicted to violence. People get addicted to drugs. There's no end. There's like 2,000, clear areas of addiction that there can be. Right? In order to get out of this addiction, as a person has to break himself somehow or other. He has to break himself. He has to break his egotism. There are all systems that the 12-step program thing, but the main thing is a person has to stop being an egotist. He has to stop being self-centered. He has to stop covering over. And one of the tricks that they use in the 12-step program is to understand that you're not God, right? That there's some power above you. You need that power which is outside of you, above you, in order to get out of your thing. Okay, what does it mean outside of you? And there's outside of your thought that you are all there is, outside of your egotism, because it's a big lie. And so your life is trapped inside of your egotism. Your whole life, your whole, I say, purpose, the good which is inside of you, is trapped inside of your own selfishness. And this selfishness has to be broken. There's ways to break it. It's not necessarily that you have to fast and things like that, but it can be broken cleverly, but still it has to be broken. And then all of a sudden is revealed the true person. The true person, he's able to love others, he's able to be kind, he's able to be understanding, he's not uptight all the time, he's not always egotistical, thinking I have to get my pleasures, my drink or whatever it is that. So it is in the whole entire world. That's what the Rebbe is saying. The whole entire world. The whole entire world is godly. It's created by God. It's enlivened by God. And it's enlivened by God that it should be used for serving God, to be harmonious with, everything should be harmonious with everything else. Everything should benefit everything else. That's supposed to be the ideal, but it's not. The world makes everything separate and selfish. So in other words, in everything, there's two uses. The use is the spark. The use can be either selfish use, right? Like a person's soul, the same thing, a person's soul. Either he can use it for drugs or for drinking or whatever he does, or he can use it to serve the Creator, to be outside, to go out of himself. The same thing with the world. The world can either be used to what the Torah wants, what God wants, or it can be used for its own selfish person. I want to go to heaven. I wanted this. I want blessings. So that's the whole idea, that by means of this breaking of the klippa, by means of breaking of this egotism, whether it's the egotism of yourself or the egotism of the world, the selfishness of the world seems to be separate from God, then there can be the revelation of godliness, which is already there. That's this spark, which is enclosed in the physical world, can be united with godliness. That's what it means, that the horses and the riders of Paro, the riders of Paro were thrown into the sea. The riders, that's the klippa, that's the shell that rides over and it covers over the spark of godliness. And that's what it means, that the Merkavas Paro, that the vehicles of Paro, and by means of breaking them, you reveal the spark of godliness, of Ein Sof, of godliness. And by means of this, there was the whole idea of the 10 plagues. The 10 plagues was in order to break these coverings, shells, in order to take out the spark of godliness which was trapped there. But the Jewish people themselves, they didn't need all these miracles at all. The miracles were for the Egyptians and for also the the Jews, to the degree that they had started to think like Egyptians. And the Jewish people inside him, the Jewish people, they already believed in God. Like it says, Vayamin Ha'am. When Moses showed them his three signs, the people believed. Vayishmu, they listened. Ki pakad Hashem, they believed that God visited them and he was taking them out. If so, these plagues were only in order to bring out the sparks of holiness which were in the klippas, therefore, which were in the shells of the evil of Egypt. There had to be these 10 plagues. Now we can understand the first of the snake, and that God Hashem Yisparech showed to Paro, Shehu Inyan, that this is the whole idea of the first plague of the snake coming from a staff, that the staff became a snake. This preceded all the 10 plagues. The first of the 10 plagues was blood. The thing of the staff wasn't one of the 10 plagues. This preceded everything. Why? Because the whole idea of the 10 plagues, like we explained, was in order to break this shell, this veneer of separateness, which the world covers over God. That it seems like the world is a separate thing on itself. Like Aparo said, the river, the Nile River belongs to me and I created myself. But just that if God does exist and he's very far away, he's called the God of gods. And all the ideas of the miracles were just to show them how that if, in fact, even though that this level of the klippa and the sitra, the evil, exists, but nevertheless, it only exists because God enlivens it all the time. Even the evil in the world receives its life from holiness. The snake comes from the staff. That really it is God that is enlivening and creating every single instant all the evil that's in the world. And really, it's not a separate thing on its own. Like they think, a cause of like their false imagination, like your false interpretation of the world says. It's completely united with godliness. It's just that life is drawn down to the Egyptians by means of all this contractions and concealments and hidings. The gavru kokach so much, this concealment and these tzimtzum and these contractions of God and this concealment of God, until the Egyptians, Paro, is able to say, the world is mine and I created myself. Therefore, when there's revealed Ha'ora Rabbah, when there is revealed a big revelation from above, all these contractions, who did the plagues? God did the plagues. When it was revealed, they completely become negated. And that was the idea of the miracle. The miracles. The Alzanan means of this. Hayamore Mofet Arishon. That's what Moses wanted to do. He wanted to give Paro a overview of what's going to happen, what the 10 plagues are for. The staff turning into a snake showed the whole general theme of all of the 10 plagues. This staff, this is Hamshacha, drawing down and revealing godliness in the world. Kain Shavit is also mean, like it says, Kochavei Shavit, like it says there's like you see a falling star, a comet. A comet. A comet has a long tail after it. It shows it's drawn after. The word Shavit means also drawing down. Namely, drawing down godliness, holiness from the highest of levels until the lowest of levels. This is called mateh. This is called the staff of life. But tanin, and that it turned into a serpent, this is the source of evil of Egypt. Like it says, a tanin gadol. We'll see this today, God willing, in the prophecy of Ezekiel. We'll learn this 3:00. Tune in. A rovitz betocha yarim. There's the great serpent that crouches in the rivers. Ve'erulo Moshe, so Moses and Aaron showed Paro how that this staff, which is godliness, transforms to a serpent, which is evil, or namely the light of godliness, which is drawn from holiness, which is, we said, is called mateh, the staff, that it can be drawn down to be and to enliven and to sustain this evil serpent, the source of klippa, of the shells. Like it says in Proverbs, her feet go down to death. It's called talking about the evil impulse, comparing the evil impulse to a prostitute. So she seems very enticing and very promising and very, very good, but really her feet go down to death. And that God, the fact is that the evil comes from God, and God is enlivening it every second. And that God's kingship extends down into everything. But this is by means of a chain of creation, concealments, contractions, veils, until it's able to be, godliness can be, that in other words, the staff can be a serpent. And by means, namely, that by means of all these contractions that God makes and God creates the world, that's the whole Bible, right? The Bible talks about how God is creating the world. By means of all this, mistater shefa, it is concealed, the godly flow and the holy flow that comes into the world, which was here symbolized by the staff. It is concealed so much until it actually can transform to be a serpent. The staff disappears. No more staff. All of a sudden, it's just pure evil. That's all you see. Just like the Jews were slaves, total abject slaves to Egypt. All there was Egypt. The Jews were just completely surrendered to the Egyptians. Now Paro is coming in. I'm sorry. Moses is coming in. Moses and Aaron are coming into Paro, and they're saying, "You are the big serpent. You are ruling over the whole world." You want to know why? Because the God of the Jews is creating you. This staff, which represents pure godliness, it can actually turn into, has the ability to actually transform into the great serpent, which is in the river, that can say, the river belongs to me, the world is mine, and I created myself. And so Paro can say, oh, so you see that God turns into a staff. So, that's it. There's no God. But and afterwards, he showed him how the snake turned back to a staff. And not only that, it also swallowed up. That staff swallowed up all of the staffs of the Egyptians. Hainu, namely, shechazar b'chinasatanin, that this big serpent transformed back to be negated totally to holiness of God. Just like the Egyptians were the servants of, were the masters, and the Jews were totally swallowed up in the Egyptians. So in the future, the Egyptians are going to be totally swallowed up in God, the Creator, because that's the fact. God is creating them. And this is the whole idea of the lifting up of these sparks, we said. And in this, he showed Moses and Aaron, demonstrated to Paro and to all the Egyptians, asher einam yesh v'daber b'fnei atzmo, that no matter how much they think that they really exist, they really don't exist. They really are not a really true existence. Ki'im, b'kol rega, every instant, nimshach lem chayos, there is drawn to them life and created force from God. But God is a kel nistater. God conceals himself. And when he wants to, when God wants to, he'll transform to a snake. When he wants to, he can transform the snake into a staff. And it'll be like there was never anything bad in the world. And that's the whole idea, basically what Moses did and what Mashiach is supposed to do. He'll just show that all the evil and all the bad in the world is really just being created by God. For some reason, we don't know. It says that in the future, we'll be grateful. How this is going to happen, I have absolutely no idea. But it says in the end, the Jewish people will be grateful for all of the suffering that they suffered. Because the suffering is also just, how do you want to say it? Imaginary, even though, don't tell anybody I said that, but that's what it is. Suffering is real suffering. You can't go to somebody who's suffering and say, it's just imaginary, it's no big deal. So you lost all your money, your house burned down, no big deal. It's not, right? Of course, suffering is true suffering, but somehow or other, when we put everything in the right perspective, then we'll realize that it was really a wonderful and a great thing. Alder says similarly, all of the miracles will only that the Egyptians would know, that the evil would realize that it's being created by God, that the whole world will see that it's an amazing, beautiful, miraculous creation constantly. And that God did not create us to be evil and selfish, but he did create us to be productive and happy and loving and positive. That's the idea of the staff turning into the snake. That's why he showed him that was the first miracle that Moses showed. And now we'll learn the Dvar Malchut.